Book 101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book, The Sleeper, The Scholar, and the Strings. No other than Mr. Joel Bouchard. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Joel, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Um, so my name is Joel Bouchard. I'm here to talk about The Sleeper, the Scholar, and the Strix. So that's a book that I wrote this past year. Um, I do a lot of other things otherwise. This is the first book that I've written. You know, I'm a PhD student in psychology. I'm a musician. I have a few albums online that you can find by searching my name. I've got a philosophy podcast from Nowhere to Nothing. And I'm a local government official in the village I live in. So that's just a kind of an overview of me in general. But yeah, so that's me, and this is the first book that I've written all the way through from beginning to end.
Mr. Joel Bouchard, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. And what is the central premise of The Sleeper, The Scholar, and the Strings?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, I guess. I didn't really set out to write a book originally. Um, like I mentioned, I've got a philosophy podcast and I'm working on a PhD in psychology. So I was at the time I was really interested in ancient mythology, and I was sort of curious why modern storytelling, whether it's in books or TV or movies or stuff, doesn't use some of the same tropes that ancient mythology does. And I was thinking about Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces and some other aspects of storytelling. And it just got me thinking, how far can you twist some of the steps in the hero's journey, and how much can you kind of integrate old ancient mythological storytelling into a modern book, and still have it be something that is uh, interesting to read and engaging and entertaining. So that was sort of the impetus behind it. And then when I got on that thought track, I started having ideas pop into my head about what that would look like. So the book itself uses a lot of the same things that the fantasy genre uses. Um, there's dragons and castles and all that type of stuff, but it's not really used in the same way that a lot of modern fantasy and fiction use it. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. There's a pantheon of gods, and there's a whole mythology that goes along with it that kind of builds the world to some extent. And I think that the thing that I like about it is that, to me, it's a book that doesn't really have a main character. There's Each character has its own storyline, and they're all pretty equally important to how it things turn out at the end.
So, how does the novel explore the interplay between gods, bees, and the humans?
Yeah. So that's kind of where the mythology comes into it, right? Mythology isn't something that's used so much in modern storytelling as it was in ancient storytelling. So I started out by writing this myth for how the world works. And there's essentially different generations of living beings that come from the original God that is sort of diffuse throughout the universe. But then there's a pantheon of gods who are kind of superhumans, and then there's humans, and then there's different species that go from there. So it's sort of like a hierarchy of different beings. So how they relate is can be interesting at times, right? Because the gods that are on the earth there are very powerful, but they're not all powerful. And there's some gods above them that don't manifest in a material form, but still have influences on the story. So yeah, there's a lot to it, the way that they interact.
Interesting, Mr. Joel. So, how does the concept of a sleeping god influence the plot?
Yeah. So off the bat, the way that the the myth sort of lays out the story is that uh, the primary god, the original god, is the god of chaos, and so that's kind of where everything comes from. All of the other gods sort of come from this god of chaos. You know, he accidentally creates the other gods because he's chaotic. And then from there, they attempt to establish order in the world. And he kind of messes with them along the way. And one of the ways he messes with them along the way is by taking the most powerful of the other gods and putting him under a spell, like putting him under a spell and kind of hiding him away under the earth. And so that's where there's a prophecy that if this sleeping god can be found, he can kind of bring peace to the rest of the world. So that's sort of the role that he plays is you know if they can find him, they think he can bring peace back to the world. Um, but it doesn't turn out to be quite that simple.
Wow, interesting indeed. Mr. Joel, in what ways does the book incorporate elements from historical events?
That's an interesting question, right? Because I I don't think that I draw on actual history too much. I think it's more drawing on kind of the stories that have been told um, throughout the world, specifically, like I was saying, in ancient mythology, and also just how ancient, stories around the world and from different cultures were kind of conceptualized by Joseph Campbell as following a certain story arc. Um, that's really where the main inspiration was, and then um, within that inspiration, kind of twisting a lot of them to see how far they could how far they could bend and still be something that worked together well.
Mhm. So, do you think there will be a prequel or sequel for this book?
Yeah, when I first wrote it, like I was saying, I didn't really intend to write a book, and so I figured when I decided I was gonna do it, I kinda thought this would be it, but, um, I'm a creative person, right? I like making music, I like painting, I like doing all kinds of art, so I've got plenty of ideas, and so the more time that passes, the more ideas I've collected for what the next couple of books would look like. And so I'm jotting down notes and kind of putting some things together and sticking with that same theme of drawing on kind of old, forgotten stories that we don't really examine much in the modern times, and sort of following along those sorts of lines while also even bending some of those to create something that is kind of new. As an artist, I always think that the best art is giving people what they want, but in an unexpected way. And that I think that applies for music and painting and writing and everything. It's just we all have this sort of need to see things presented in a way that seems attractive and fulfilling to us. But we wanna be surprised, we don't wanna see something coming or it's boring, but we also don't wanna have something that's completely, out in left field because then we can't relate to it, so, I think a good artist is always trying to strike that balance.
Certainly. Speaking of music, I'm inviting you to please do listen my Music 101 in its third season, people. So I'm inviting you, Mr. Joel, to be part of Music 101 and let's talk about your music itself.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you so much. And I have also abstract essay where I'm interviewing artists like you. You like paintings or whatever painting that you're doing, abstract essay is suited for you. So, for the novel, what role does the Strix play in the narrative?
Yeah, the Strix, he initially starts out as, and this is part of what I was trying to do with it is create a novel where there's no main character. All each character is essential to the story, and also where sort of the good and the bad characters are harder to identify as well. So you start reading and you have a pretty good idea of who the villains are and who the heroes are. But the Strix doesn't really fit into that mold very much. He's kind of walking this line between good and bad, and along the way finds himself um, tied into the main plot a little more than I think that he had any sort of inclination he was meant to be. But he's a mercenary. He's essentially sort of a mysterious soldier that roams the earth, and he's known for being a very good fighter, and so he's hired for a very important job that kind of uh, pulls him into the rest of the plot.
So, Mr. Joel, what would be your advice for those people out there who want to write their own novel?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question. I think anybody who's ever tried to write a novel uh, realizes how hard it is. I think that a lot of people on the outside think, oh, okay, well, you just sit down and you start at the beginning and you write till you're finished, and that's the end of it. But I tried to write two or three different books that way, and in all cases, you just end up writing yourself into a corner or realizing that you didn't have an idea for what was going to happen. So. Um, I think that outlining is very important, but if you're somebody like me who works really fast, you don't like to outline. You don't like to outline. You don't like to revise. It really takes you out of that creative process. So what worked for me with this book was something called the snowflake method. And if you just search for it online, snowflake method, you can find the website, and they even have some software that will help you out with formatting it. But essentially, the way it works is you start by summing up your whole story in just one sentence, which is really hard. That might be the hardest part. But then you take that one sentence and you turn it into a paragraph, and then you turn each sentence in the paragraph into its own paragraph, and then each of those paragraphs then becomes a chapter, and then each sentence in those paragraphs becomes a scene, right? And so rather than having to outline, you really start from a point where as long as you know what you want your story to be about from the beginning, you kind of build the outline, through this expansion, through this kind of detailing from most broad to most specific. And so I spent about 2 weeks writing an outline that way. And then, the next summer, I spent another 2 weeks and just wrote the novel from beginning to end. And then my good friend went through and edited it, and that was it. So there wasn't multiple drafts. There wasn't a big outlining process where there's a bunch of moving things back and forth. Overall, it was about it was about 40 hours worth of work. So it was pretty quick. But I was really pleased with the results. I like the tone of it. It's very episodic. It moves very fast, but it keeps you on your toes. So I think that for people who are looking to get something done quick, or you don't have the patience for outlining, or it's your first time, any of those types of things, I'd highly suggest the snowflake method. But most importantly is just that you have an outlining method of some kind, so that you have as you're trying to get from one bank of the shore to another, you have some stepping stones that you can hop to across the river so you don't drown.
Certainly. And stop procrastinating, people. If you have the passion to write, write, like Mr. Joel, and use snowflakes. So, what will be your short term and long term goals in writing?
Yeah, I'm somebody who hops from thing to thing, right? So right now I'm really focusing on my PhD. I'm getting into the dissertation part, which is very time consuming. And on top of that, like I mentioned at the beginning, I work in the local government, which is kind of a part-time job on top of my full-time job. So um,
Busy,
a lot
busy
of
man.
yeah, a lot of things. Yeah, yeah. I've got my podcast, so very, very busy. Um, so I don't know exactly the timeline for writing the next book, but um, I think that what'll happen is, in the next year after I finish my degree, and after I've collected so many ideas, I don't think I have quite enough ideas to start outlining the second book yet. But I think a year from now, when I'm done with my degree, I will have collected enough notes in my iPhone notepad that I can go in and write another outline and do another book. So I would guess, probably 2, 3 years from now, I'll have a sequel. And So that would kind of be the short term, but the long term is really just to have fun, right? That's the reason I do any of the things that I do is uh, just because I find them interesting, right? And I hope that other people do and other people want to read them, but ultimately, uh, I'm just doing it because I love to do it.
Definitely. If you have the passion of what you're doing, even if you're tired, you are dedicated to do it. So good luck to your goal, Mr. Joel, and looking forward for more books like this. So how does the pacing of the novel affect the reader's experience?
Yes, yes, I think that it's a very big part of it, right? I think that, um, one thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, especially today with sort of the fast-paced environment that we have with technology and things is, having the attention span to sit through and read and go through it. It's a short book, it's 220 pages, something like that. Um, but it hops between character perspectives, uh, frequently. And it's also, um, fast-paced. I'm somebody who I have a pretty big imagination, so as a result, I don't really like it in books when people spend a whole lot of time detailing things for me, right? Because sometimes that ruins it. I go, "Oh, okay, I had a picture of what this person looked like or what this area looked like, and now you've sort of spelled it out for me, and now I can't really figure out what it looks like in my head anymore." So I let the reader do that themselves, quite a bit. I'll let a lot of the detail, uh, let them fill in a lot of the details about what things look like. So it's fast paced. It's it, I my what my editor said was it's very cinematic, like a movie or like a TV show where you're watching a scene and there's a lot of action and a lot of things happening, and then you're hopping to the next scene. And then eventually at the end they all kind of coalesce and the story sort of comes together. So it's very fast paced, and that's something that I really enjoy about it.
The same with Mr. Joel. Fast pacing, people. So, what conflicts arise between the different factions within the story?
So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting dynamics. One of the things that comes about is the reason that people want to find this sleeping god and wake him up is because there's a lot of war, right? So there's always been a lot of war between the various gods and the various factions and things, and so you see some of that play out throughout the throughout the story as the different characters are moving around the world. Sometimes they're in friendly territory, sometimes they're in enemy territory. Sometimes they find themselves in places that um, are neither friend or foe, right? They ended up someplace that they didn't anticipate, and now there's sort of new uh, dangers or that they didn't know about. So there's a pretty robust climate happening where in addition to the gods themselves being at war, the different societies around the planet all have their own unique uh, kind of flavors and interactions, and then on top of that the relationships of the main characters are all such that there are some that are being pursued and some that are running and some that are helping, and it's pretty diverse. Like I said, along with the fast pacing, it creates for something that from what people have told me keeps you pretty interested and engaged throughout the book.
Interesting, Mr. Joel. And what are the major turning points in the story?
Yeah,
Without
so
spoiler.
yeah, yeah. That's a hard one to do without a spoiler, but yeah, it's I would say that there's some things that you would expect, right? Okay, so if
Mm,
if you have a sleeper, a scholar, and a Strix, um, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that the sleeper plays some part in the story, right?
yes.
Um, but so if he plays some part in the story, and if the myth says that when he wakes up, that peace will be returned, um, well, then that something must be off, right? Because he must wake up, but things must not all be hunky dory if that's the case. So that's a big turning point, right? Is sort of how what happens after he wakes up, is a big turning point, as well as some of the characters just not being what they seem, and that all goes into uh, you know, like I was saying with Joseph Campbell, and having characters who had archetypes was a big thing with him, right? You have the hero and the wise old man and all these things. And part of what I was doing with the story was taking these archetypes and flipping them and switching them and playing with them that way. So just because at the beginning of the book, or when you're introduced to characters, they seem to be one thing, uh, they don't always play out to be that way in the end. So there's a lot of different turning points along the way. And in my mind, a lot, they're all major because they all contribute to the way that things turn out at the end. But yeah, it's fun.
It's fun, and you need to read it, people, so that you will know where's the turning points of the story. So before we wrap up our discussion today, Mr. Joel, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, in its fifth season, people. Fifth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the specialty chef in one of five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We are talking about, we're reading all our letter senders all over the world. So, Mr. Joel, how does the resolution of the plot address the initial turmoil presented?
Yeah, I won't lie to you. It's a cliffhanger. So I again, I didn't intend to write a series of books. But when I came to wrapping this book up, I realized that there's a lot of other places things could go. So uh there are several things that do get resolved from the initial turmoil. But then, part of what goes along with the turning points and with the character switching and those types of things is that there's new turmoils, right? There's new things that happen and continue on. So yeah, I think that there's definitely some resolution to the problems that started, but kind of like in real life, um, anytime you end a journey in real life, there's always another one that's starting.
Mr. Joel Bouchard, thank you so much for sharing your book to the world, and we are looking forward for more and more and more novels to come. So can you please invite our listeners to support your book?
Yeah, yeah, I'd appreciate it. Anybody who wants to read it, you can find it on Amazon, ebook form, paperback, hardcover, and yeah, appreciate your support.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Joel Bouchard, because if you support him, as I said, more novels to come. So, Mr. Joel, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
More to come, people. See you soon.